Hi, you guys. I'm just going to be covering sort of the tail end of Chapter 8 that we didn't get to, just because we're not going to have class on Tuesday when I was anticipating we were. I just forgot. Sorry about that. So we're just going to cover sort of the rest of this, and then I'll also post I already did post your exam review that you can just do on your own. We won't be able to play it together, which sucks, but everything will be sort of up there for you to do on your own. We were talking about gender this week and sex and gender, and we talked about some of the theories, and we left off talking. The next topic is homosexuality, and so this is a concept or sort of identity that emerged in around the mid-19th century, where it sort of started becoming a separate identity, because people were absolutely engaging in homosexual activity prior to that. If you go far back historically, it was the norm in a lot of cultures, but sort of the idea of it being a separate identity really emerged in the mid-19th century or so. And remember, we talked about Michel Foucault. We talked about him in chapter 6 when we were talking about the punishment and things like that. Well, he relates the emergence of the homosexual identity to the development of scientific disciplines, and also that sort of idea, that desire to monitor and categorize people and behavior. So sort of related to the monitoring of society that we talked about from a sort of criminal justice perspective, that also applies to something like this, because it's this idea of we want to monitor and categorize people, so we need everybody to have a certain name and identity. And so Foucault also introduced the notion that self-surveillance is a form of social control. So it's that same idea of, just like we want to control other people in terms of deviance and crime, we also want to control them in all types of behavior, including sexual behavior, apparently. So it became a deviant personality type pretty quickly, and it was actually listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders as a mental disorder, and up until 1973, which, if you think about it, is not that long ago, where it was still considered a mental disorder for somebody to be attracted to the same gender. So it became relevant to identify and regulate homosexuality because it was seen as deviant. So it was this idea that we need to know who these people are, and we need to regulate this behavior, because of course it affects everybody. And so, what two people do when they're on their alone. So, but it became this idea that we want to identify and we want to regulate this behavior. And so informal social control through things like self-surveillance ended up replacing formal punishment in modern society. So there was formal punishment. Like if you go back, like under a sovereign king, it was discipline through like scaffold or stockade, and that was that direct, punitive, physical force punishment that you would see. That kind of was replaced by this idea of this informal social control. So it started to be, well, now people were just going to treat you differently if you had this label, and we're going to have certain expectations, or so it wasn't a punishable offense anymore, but it switched to informal self-control. It was still seen as deviant, but it's sort of switched the way that we try to control. Now, today, sexuality greatly impacts others' views and also opinions, and also our own self-identity. So it sort of affects how people see us and also how we see ourselves. And it certainly has become a master status, in the sense that if we know this about somebody, we treat them differently, which is unfortunate. It's absolutely getting a whole lot better, especially since it's no longer a mental disorder, and it's not illegal anymore or anything like that. So, and it's becoming much more accepted, obviously. I'm sure you guys are as well aware of that as I am, but it's this idea that it's not a big deal anymore, but still it can serve as a master status, and there still are people who would treat somebody very differently once they find that out about that person. All right, so then we can look at, because we're looking at gender inequality. Inequality happens for young kids as well as adults. And so gender inequality is still rampant in schools. We would like to think that boys and girls are treated the same in schools, but that is not the case. So even if you look at college, females outnumber males in overall enrollment, which never used to be the case, but that's the case now. But men still dominate the traditionally masculine fields. So a lot of the STEM fields like math and physics and economics, yeah, but engineering and things like that. But so men are still dominating those sort of traditionally masculine fields, and also men outnumber women at elite colleges. So if you go to your Harvard and Stanford and whatnot, the elite colleges, they are still having more men accepted than women. So females are in general outnumbering males overall, but yet you go to the elite colleges or some of the more difficult to get into programs and men are outnumbering women there. When you look at sort of younger school age, elementary school, boys and girls are treated differently by teachers. And I mean, schools are generally the first agent of socialization that children experience outside of their immediate family. So our families are our first agent of socialization. School tends to be second. And so this may be the first time that children are introduced to thoughts or ideas that contradict what they've learned from their families. And so schools are a very important agent of socialization, and the messages that students receive in schools can definitely have a huge impact on the way that children think about themselves. And so research does show that in school, teachers tend to favor boys in a lot of ways. First of all, boys receive more attention. They receive more instructional time compared to girls. They're more likely to be called on in class. They tend to be posed with sort of more challenging questions or tasks. So they have that ability to develop their brain and their thinking and their critical thinking skills more so than girls. And then they're also given more praise for the quality of their work. And when you think about that, and this is like, if this has been supported by research, we're seeing this happen. So what kind of message does that send to the boys, and what kind of message does that send to the girls? And it's not good for either group. And so have these differential treatment, and I mean, it tends to not be intentional, but it's happening. And whether it's intentional or not, if it's happening, and it's going to have an effect. And then even if we look at like textbooks and other materials that are used in schools, they often reinforce gender stereotypes. They're getting better, definitely getting better, but a lot of schools can't afford to buy the new textbooks. And so if you can't afford to buy the new textbooks, you're using the old textbooks that still really badly reinforce those gender stereotypes, where all the doctors and lawyers are all pictured as men, and then the nurses and the cleaning ladies and everything, those are all women, of course. And so when you have that reinforcement of those stereotypes, again, it's not overt necessarily, but if all the pictures you're seeing are reinforcing these stereotypes that basically says women should either have sort of low-level or sort of service-type jobs, or not have jobs at all and just be in the home and taking care of children, where men are the ones that actually have the real powerful jobs and where they can actually have real social change in the business world. That kind of it's setting our young kids up for failure throughout their life, in the sense of they can only go one path or another. They don't have the freedom to choose whichever path they want, because a lot of men are very interested in child rearing, and that's what they want to do, and they're very nurturing, and they're wonderful fathers, but they feel like in society they're not allowed to have that as their primary sort of use of their time. They have to also have a good job, and it's tough to do both of those. Not impossible, but tough. And so if we're starting this right from young school age, then these problems are going to follow these children up all the way through their lives. And then we can look at gender in the workplace. And so there's about the same number of women and men in the workforce today. So things are pretty much even in terms of just straight numbers. But women still face challenges in the workplace. First of all, the income gap. There is an income gap. There is unequal pay. People like to pretend that there isn't, but there is. It's getting narrower, but it's still there. It's crucial to understand that what this means is for a man and a woman who are equally qualified. That means that they have the same education, the same skills, the same experience. The woman is likely to be paid around, it's somewhere between, I think it's around 23% less than, it's between 23 and 25. So if we say 23% less than a man applying for the same position. So we're not talking about, oh, well, it's because men are in these positions that should be paid more, or they have gone to these more elite level colleges and so they should be paid more. No, we are talking about if they have the same qualifications, the same experience, and so, but it just, the women are going to be paid less in the same position. And I mean, 23 cents on the dollar, maybe that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but when you look at annual salaries, that is huge. That means a man would be making $50,000 a year doing the same job as a woman getting paid $38,500, so $38,500 for the same job when they have the same experience and the same education, etc. So that's a problem. There's also, of course, sexual harassment. Then this has become a huge issue. It has sort of become more into the forefront through the Me Too movement. There's sexism. There's tracking to certain kind of jobs where women are supposed to go in these kinds of jobs and men are supposed to go in these kinds of jobs. And there's also the feminization of jobs. And so when you have women who do obtain positions that are typically dominated by men, then they face enormous pressure. So there's a sense that all women are going to be judged based on their performance. And so then they're often caught in kind of this catch-22 where, in terms of their behavior, where if they kind of act just like a man in order to do the job the way it's expected to be done, then they're seen as unfeminine and then somehow unattractive. And then if they exhibit the more feminine qualities, then they're seen as not tough enough. And so, especially if you look at something like lawyers, if you're a female lawyer, you have to be tougher than a man in the same situation to get the same amount of respect. But then that respect you get is, kind of like, well, she's a stone cold bitch. Kind of, that's what you have to be successful in that kind of job, whereas men don't have to do that. And then, of course, you have the glass ceiling, which is where women are limited in terms of upward mobility. So if you are in a male-dominated field, then women sort of hit a ceiling, so to speak, and so they can't move any higher. It's limited mobility. But then men working in female-dominated fields, not only do they not have the glass ceiling, but they often get this glass escalator effect, where men are actually accelerated in terms of their upward mobility if they get a job within female-dominated jobs. And so this is not as true as it used to be, but it's still that if it's a man working in a female-dominated field, they don't seem to face the same scrutiny and they don't seem to face those same challenges that women working in male-dominated fields do. And so the major exception to this, though, is in the field of modeling. Females earn up to twice as much as males for doing the same work. So that's a field where women are in charge there. But in general, we see that it's this opposite effect. And so if a woman is trying to get ahead in a male-dominated field, she's going to hit the glass ceiling. If a man is trying to get ahead in a woman-dominated field, then he's going to shoot forward. Like you look at something like nursing. This is absolutely the case where it's still female-dominated, but any male nurses, people want male nurses. And so the more male nurses there are, they're the ones who are going to be moving up more quickly because they're in high demand. So again, this is not as true as it used to be. Things are getting better as a whole. The income gap is getting lower and the glass ceiling is being shattered by some women. But it's just really tough. And the fact that it's happening and that, we're seeing more equality, it doesn't mean that women aren't still facing more of those challenges in those scenarios and in those situations. So even though it's like, oh, well, this person got this great job or they were able to move up, and, even though it was a woman and wasn't expected to happen, but how many challenges did she have to face to get there when a man getting to that same place wouldn't have to have to face those challenges? So you have to sort of consider that as well. So that's it for your chapter 8. So if you have any questions about that or sort of anything that we've gone over, just let me know. And so remember to do your exam review and then write your exam this week. And let me know if you have any questions about that as well. All right.